Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Next, I'm going to introduce a Far East city to overview, and such a city produced Maltai, the white liqueur, the most famous liqueur in China. The story of Guiyang is rich and complex. It is located in the southwest China and is pivotal gateway for the industrial that is far reached from the coastal megacities. The national trend that we will be seeing over the next decade will be a massive migration from rural to urban. It is estimated that a total of 250 million people will move into urban areas. With explosive growth, Guiyang will experience a 50% of population increase within the next 15 years. This means that approximately 6 million people will be living in Guiyang City by 2023. And yet, aside from the explosive growth, one must also take into account Guiyang's strong historical legacy. The city was founded during the Yuan dynasty in 1283 AD, and with the hope of retaining this legacy, Guiyang is managing to preserve significant historical buildings, such as the Jiaxiu Lo Tower, which dated back in 1598. The city extends, covering an area of 8,000 square kilometers. The topography is a challenge for development and new infrastructure, but the city has managed to establish great transportation connections around and through the mountains. This adds a memorable and unique layer of beauty to the cityscape. The city's morphology began as a settlement along the Nanming River. This model is typical to many cities in the southwest region of China. As the city expands, urban sprawl was limited by the mountains. Mountain formations challenged growth and require risky investment in new infrastructure. With the pressure of growth and expansion, the city developed satellite clusters in the adjacent valleys. Mountains were negotiated with tunnels and valleys with bridges. These urban clusters challenged the notion of Guiyang as a city with a significant central business district. For the Guizhou Culture Plaza project, my company, the Zhongtian Urban Development Group, decided to reinvest in the downtown city core. By defining the old city, the historical legacy now becomes a critical asset of our new development. On any given new project that we understand, we always consider the issue of placemaking. The historical city core was already rich with cultural assets. So, creating a new development with a strong and unique identity was much easier. Here's a view of Guiyang's amazing topography at night. As you can see, limestone casts are scattered in the landscape, which make it challenging for new constructions. These land formations give Guiyang an incredible uniqueness. The city is beautiful and multi-layered. The casts dominated the skyline, and the mixture of the new development with the old buildings of lower density show a city that is changing rapidly. But the necessary infrastructure isn't yet in place. To sustain all of this growth, the process of modernization has to be done responsibly. We have to avoid and limit construction that isn't up to safety standards. We need a larger plan, a vision for the future. With the Nanming CBD Riverfront Master Plan, we took it on ourselves to put in place a forward-thinking vision for the future of Guiyang. We can densify the urban core by providing the necessary infrastructure to sustain this growth in a responsive way. This meant doubling the existing GFA with 12 million square meters of new construction. This, of course, can be done with a detailed strategy to enhance transportation networks, infrastructure, and utility access. By taking a closer look at the present condition, we can see that Nanming River dominates the city center. It organizes culture, civic, and entertainment assets along its spine. This is a city focused on riverfront development, and for us, this is our entry point into introducing density. By revitalizing the Nanming River with new development, we can positively spark the renewal of the downtown core. The Guiyang Cultural Plaza site is dynamic. We sought to establish a new development that would serve as a hub or interconnector. This site is integrated into the subway network and is adjacent to major arterial roads. We had significant planning area available, but we decided to leverage open space as an asset and give back to the public as much as possible. The Performance Arts Center, which is located on the Nanming Riverfront, represents our collective aspiration as builders and developers. Shaping the public experience also means investigating in cultural assets. These assets embodied the energy and cultural legacy of the region, which is why it was so important for us to make this cultural center a reality. We firmly believe in developing projects that renew and reaffirm the cultural identity of the host city, in our case, beautiful Guiyang. It is through these aspirations that we can achieve the layered richness which you see here. For us, developing in a historical setting can restore and re-engage. Guiyang is a city in flux, and as it transitions to being a global presence, its historical and cultural legacy will be fundamental to its unique identity. At the moment, we'd like to invite Colin Koop, Design Director at SOM, to talk specially about the Guiyang Cultural Plaza Tower design. Thank you. Yeah, just press that.
Okay, I'm here to talk about the tower. Recently, SOM has engaged in a kind of dialogue about the future of the skyscraper. We invited a variety of people outside of the design world to sort of talk about how they view the typology and what they imagine it could be. And it was interesting to see that outside of what they had, they hadn't talked to each other, and yet they came across a lot of themes that we're seeing in our work increasingly. And those themes are away from the idea of a kind of siloed single-use building and towards the idea of mixed-use urban habitats, away from the idea of a kind of secured building which holds the city at bay, and towards a kind of tower that it wants to be hyperporous, particularly at the base, a kind of node in a larger network, a kind of social condenser where people, different people who are doing different things kind of interchange with each other. And I think most critically, particularly for the future of Guiyang, the idea of the tower not being a kind of symbol of a single kind of commercial endeavor, but rather the idea of a kind of catalyst for growth for an entire district or even an entire city, and doing that in a sustainable way. And so those become the themes of this project, very much so, because of the unique conditions of the site. There's another layer to this, which is that we at SOM believe very much in the idea of integrated practice, and in particular the idea of looking at the lens of a singular project in many different ways. So we have the lens of urban planning, the lens of architecture, the lens of engineering. We want all of those people working collaboratively and seamlessly to create a tower. So we set the goal for ourselves to kind of create a kind of synthetic representation of those urban ideas and also of those structure ideas. So the specificity of this site drove a lot of our design. It's a very small site, an almost impossibly small site if you look at that dotted line relative to the footprint of the tower. That site was a sort of a specific request of the government. There is a ceremonial civic access across the river, one which is their central urban plaza, their botanic gardens, and their arts tower. And this tower was intended to be the culmination of that. This is a brand new development piece. And they were seeking clarity out of the complexity. There is very little urban morphology to this city because of that topography, because a grid is nearly impossible to superimpose on this city. And so this was an opportunity to sort of create clarity where none existed. There's also the dense pedestrian networks that you saw Mr. Kylie speak about of their development. And you can almost see between those two places how the tower has the possibility of being a hinge and actually connecting people together as opposed to standing mute and apart from the city. And then finally, this idea of the Nanming River. There is actually a beautiful river walk that connects all of the major commercial landmarks, civic landmarks, and arts landmarks of this city together. It is the one thread that ties everything, and it was very important that this project would be a sort of capstone to that. So if you look at those constraints, it meant, number one, no podium. There's a sort of a bustle on the back of the tower, but that was an advantage for us. Most towers oftentimes have a symbiotic relationship with the interiors of their tower and the interiors of their podium, but that cuts the city off. Here, our symbiotic relationship is with the tower, the city surrounding it itself. And we took that to its extreme. We wanted to see to what extent we could welcome in all of these different flows, interconnect this tower together, but do it in a way that looks resolute and simple. And the result of that is a kind of pinwheel design in terms of how people access the building. So you can come from any direction, and you really can flow into this tower in a very permeable way, both at grade and above grade, where there's connections to the space across the river and to the plaza adjacent. Those connections are literal structural connections. So our tower's structure bridges the river, transforming from a gravity-loaded structural system to a compressive system that can bridge and make that physical connection, allowing people that freedom of movement. And then ultimately, all of that energy feeds vertically into the tower itself, feeding into a lot of different uses. This is a multi-use tower. The result is a series of stacked communities, offices, hotel, observation, but this is also flexible and could change in the future. A sectional sort of diagram of how that relationship occurs, the lifting of the structure across the river to grab that civic access, bring it into the heart of the tower. And the space of the ground floor of the building was sort of carved away to create this sort of Pyrenean experience where circulation, structure, activity, and energy are all sort of intertwined in a single environment. And yet on the outside, the tower is quite stable and projects a very sort of pure appearance. And that is a result of a very unique structural system. The idea of the superframe as a structural system is one that has existed in the sort of typological studies of SOM structures for decades, but is one that's never been done because of the complexity of the undertaking, the challenges of the detailing, and also just finding the right opportunity to do it. But we were quite interested in the way that it was literally sort of vertical communities wrought in steel, that this is literally 10 or 12-story buildings that are transferring out one from the other. And the reality is today, with our integrated design processes, we actually can design this. So this project was the reality of architects and engineers sitting directly next to each other, elbow to elbow, coming up with a custom scripting process where we can literally bake iterations of this tower in seconds, and then seamlessly transport that out to either our BIM or our structural analysis models. And the result of that becomes this kind of back and forth, that sort of idea of a lens looking at a project as opposed to people coming from different vantage points. So we can simultaneously taper the structure to give it a greater stability while also looking at the tapering to optimize the program. And from there, we can break down the superframe into a series of nodes that tie directly to an elevatoring process. So we end up with actually a 14-story kind of serial node that rises up the buildings. We can actually gather all of the columns and break them into 4 per corner. So we have a trussed superframe, which creates a great degree of stability in a very small site. And ultimately, all of that then creates hardened parts of the building that then feed into both the mechanical systems and the life safety system. So that horizontal brace that you see is actually the safest place in the building where we allocate life safety. And then finally, the idea of articulating the superframe, eliminating any kind of horizontal transfer entirely, and doing that actually cleaves the corners of the building to create this sort of singular shape where those series of programmatic stacks are sort of grasped by this structural cage. So there you can see its sort of image in the skyline, how it resolves with that bridge kind of pairing out at the base. The planning of the tower as it cascades upwards with kind of cruciform center core that ties back to those columns. No outriggers on this tower, so it's quicker to construct than a typical tower because of those horizontal braces. That carving away the corner lessened the wind load significantly, saving a significant amount of structural tonnage. And there you see how the weight and the structure is actually braced. So that brace in the center, as you can see, we showed earlier, there's how all of the smaller columns are offset. So we actually guide the gravity loads to help us to stabilize this tower to get approval in China. And then the base of the tower is this sort of lantern in the city. The final thing about the tower that I'll say is that there is a skyline to Guiyang. It's actually an incredibly gorgeous skyline if you ever go there. And we wanted the tower to feel like an extension of that. So the idea of kind of resolving it into a parabolic arch at the top so that its silhouette would relate to the city. One last note, and Mr. Kylie talked very eloquently about this, the growth of this city is going to be explosive, and this project, similar to those trends, can either be a catalyst or a kind of harbinger of things to come. And so when we designed the Nanming Central Business District, and we knew that they wanted to triple the amount of area in the Central Business District, we were determined to balance that with livability, with sustainability, and mass transportation. So here we double the amount of open space, the open space acting as sutures to the river, allowing rainwater to be cleaned before entering the river itself, a series of pocket parks inserted into the density of the city, so that unlike densities of other cities which can be unrelenting, there's a tremendous amount of open space, and all of it extends from the historic fabric of the river's front. All of the variables was important that they would move in the correct direction. So focusing very carefully on projecting forward using mass transportation, the drop in energy consumption, the rise in the amount of open space, the other elements. And ultimately, this is about transforming a city which was passed over for generations during the growth of China and is now being sort of grown as an inland city, and instead trying to find a livable and sustainable way of designing. Thank you.